Question number 3 tonight. Why did the disciples struggle to recognize and to believe that it was Jesus after he rose from the dead, after all that they had already seen? I think in some ways, maybe Sam just answered that question for us. There's a lot of overlap there. There's actually 2 questions when you look at the way it's worded. First of all, why did they struggle to recognize Jesus? Let's turn to Luke chapter 24, because that's the passage that the questioner points us to in particular. And so let's answer the first question first. Why is it that they struggle to recognize him? You would think if these had been disciples who had been with him for the last 3 years, they would have immediately recognized him. But let's read it and see what it says, beginning in verse 13 of Luke chapter 24. That very day, there were 2 of them who were going to a village named Emmaus. By the way, the 2 we are identified later on. Cleopas was one of them. In verse 18, he's specifically named. And then the other one, we really don't know who it was. Tradition says maybe Luke. We really don't know. One thing we do know, it was definitely not any of the apostles, because these 2 finally go and find the apostles down in verses 33 and 34. So whoever these 2 guys were, they were not apostles. And so could they have followed Jesus a lot over the last few years? Yeah. Could they have known what he looked like? Yeah. But they were not part of the apostle group. But they were going to this village. This was on the first day of the week. Jesus had been raised that morning, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about all the things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. Verse 16 says, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And of course, the question is, well, why not? Well, it appears that there was an outside influence. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. As you read a little further, verse 17, he said to them, what is this conversation that you're holding with each other as you walk? And so they stood still and they looked sad. And one of them, Cleopas, answered and said, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened here in these days? And then skip down to verse 30, because he goes ahead, Jesus does, and explains things about himself, going back to the old law, the prophets. And in verse 30, when he sat down with these guys and was at the table with them, he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them, and their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And then it says he vanished from their sight. Now again, the recognition thing, maybe it was miraculous, maybe it wasn't, but when he vanished from their sight, yeah, that's miraculous. And I think it was probably all part of the package, that it was a miraculous thing that kept their eyes from recognizing him. Especially, I think that's true when you look at Mark's account. Mark's the only one that even mentions this, and he spends like 1 or 2 verses on it. Mark chapter 16 and verse 12. After these things, Jesus appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking. He appeared in another form. And so, yeah, it seemed to have been a purposeful thing on the part of Jesus to disguise himself so that they would not recognize him on that occasion. As to why he would have done that, yeah, I don't know. The second question, I think, again, this is maybe a little more serious, and a question that again falls back to the kinds of things that Sam was talking about a while ago. Why would they have struggled to believe that it was Jesus after he rose from the dead, after all that they had seen? Well, Sam, you want to come preach that again? It's the same thing. Again, they struggled. They struggled throughout their time with Jesus. Even when they believed that he was the Christ, the Son of God, they still struggled. There were times when their vision was still blurred, right? In Mark chapter 16, if you're still in the Gospel of Mark there, verse 10, Mary Magdalene went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After these things, he appeared in another form to 2 of them. We just read that. And then verse 13, and they went back and told the rest. These 2 guys go and told the rest, the 11, but they did not believe them. Afterwards, verse 14, Jesus appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them, listen to this, for their unbelief and their hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who said that they saw him after he had arisen. Somebody asked the question, so why would they not believe it was Jesus? Well, Jesus says, because of your unbelief, because of your hard heart. The apostles themselves struggled with that. And when you go back to Luke's account, go back to Luke chapter 24 and verse 37. They were startled and frightened. Again, Jesus appears to the apostles in this room, and they were startled and frightened, and they thought that they saw a spirit. And he said to them, why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Now, what he was doing was providing them evidence. And while they still disbelieved for joy, while they were marveling, he said to them, have you anything to eat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before them. And again, that seems a little odd, but it's evidence. It is evidence to the fact that he's not a spirit, that he is actually flesh and blood. He's been raised from the dead. He's got the wounds to show them. He actually eats fish before them. He's providing them evidence that he, in fact, was the risen Messiah. And so he was working on developing their faith even after he was raised from the dead. But if you ask the question, again, why would they have struggled with that? I think the answer is very simple, because they were human. And they struggled with their faith the same way you and I struggle with ours. I mean, believing that there is a resurrection from the dead, believing that intellectually is one thing. But to come face to face with it, that would be an awe-inspiring thing. And I think it would strain credulity for all of us to come face to face with one who had been raised from the dead, even if it was Jesus the Messiah. Easy for us to be Monday morning quarterbacks, to say, well, they should have done this and this. I don't know that if we were there, we'd have done anything different. We might not have been as believing as they were. And so, good question, but I just think we can chalk that off to the fact that they were human and they struggled with those faith issues just like you and I do sometimes.